So, hey everyone, thanks for joining us in this next installment of discussions on practical ways to improve vulnerability management programs. For those of you who weren't able to attend in January or didn't get a chance to watch the replay, first of all, tisk tisk. I'm sad. I'm really disappointed, but I know all of you are wonderful people, and I won't hold it against you this time. And because you're likely wondering who is this guy talking, my name is Ravi Pentapati, and I've recently started collaborating with Brinket in a customer advocate and security evangelist capacity. I spent the better part of the past 10 years building and leading programs related to vulnerability management and cloud security and application security. Previous to that, I was working in various security compliance roles as well. And I was leading the threat and vulnerability management program and the cloud security teams for a Fortune 500 media and entertainment company before beginning my work with Brinket in January. I will say I'm far more comfortable in a Tenable console than I am moderating panel discussions. So please hold off on the virtual booing until the end of the presentation, if you don't mind. So we're not here today to talk about banning TikTok or Silicon Valley Bank, because I'm sure all of you are very sick of hearing about both of those topics. But what we are here today is to discuss the extremely ambiguous and nebulous topic of business context and how it can aid in the prioritization of your security program. The reason it's so nebulous and ambiguous is that it can really mean a lot of things to a lot of different people. So in light of that, your personal experiences shape what it means to you. And there's no way I could handle such a weighty topic by myself. That said, I'm happy to be joined today by two other security leaders, Kayla Williams and Josh Copeland. Hi, Kayla. Hi, Josh. How are you?
Hi, thank you for having us.
Of course. Happy to be here. I got a 3 on my Wordle today. My 5-year-old made it to school on time. It's a good day. So Kayla, so would you like to introduce yourself?
Yeah, absolutely. Hi, everybody. I am Kayla Williams. I am the CISO at Devo Technology. I've been here for 2 years. Prior to that, I was over at a company previously called LogMeIn, now they're called Go2, and I built their GRC program. And then before that, I was at a financial services company, and jack of all trades, master of none, information security, enterprise risk management, program management, internal audit capacity. So I have a very varied background when it comes to risk management and control management.
Very cool. So a little bit of a background in compliance then, if I may, kind of make that leap. Can you tell us a little bit more about the company you currently work for and the, kind of the size and what Devo does?
Yeah, absolutely. So Devo is a cloud native data analytics company. We are about 500 or so employees. We've had explosive growth in the past year. We acquired 2 companies, Cognos and Logic Hub last year. So of course, absorbing their employees through that acquisition and the integration of the products. And yeah, we are, we're a market leader for data analytics and SIEM. And, we are, one of our biggest customers that I'd love to work with is actually Josh over AT&T, and it's been quite a wild ride. Learning a lot from Josh, and hopefully he's learning a lot from me through these things.
Absolutely. And finally, what is the last YouTube video you watched, and what will you cop to?
The last YouTube. So it's funny. So my husband's English, and I just subscribed to a UK TV Land 6 channel or whatever. So I've actually been watching a lot of their panel comedy shows. And recently it's been the Big Fat Quiz of the Year.
Love it.
Or Big Fat Quiz of the Decade, so the 80s, 90s, 2000s.
I love it.
Yeah.
I love it. Very cool. Well, Josh, over to you. Who is this AT&T company that you work for, and what do you do there?
AT&T, it's just a small little telco that's been around for a short period of time. Mm-hmm. My role with AT&T, I'm one of the security directors. What that really means is I'm essentially a vCISO. I'm in the consulting division. AT&T is kind of one of those massive lumbering organizations that people, they know the name, but they don't know everything that they do. I'm in consulting, and largely we do all of the network security, networking, and then actual typical IT type consulting, whether it's doing RFSs, request for services, or just helping them up their security game. Prior to working in this role, I ran one of their SOCs. It was actually about 5 of their SOCs all aggregated together. And then prior to that, I worked at another Fortune 500 company. I did cloud platform security for federal customers, 3 other agencies, all the spooky boys that are out there doing kind of cool stuff in the cloud. And prior to that, I was Air Force for 20 years doing everything you can possibly imagine in IT. And my unique niche with the Air Force was I dealt with nuclear weapons security. So it was kind of
awesome.
a weird context of cybersecurity and nuclear weapons. So that's kind of where my niche
business context for you is really, really important, and a really important topic, no matter where you've been in your career, whether it's the Air Force or AT&T, et cetera, et cetera. Yeah. But just to be clear, your role at AT&T is more to be a consulting, but consulting for what types of companies? And I believe you're kind of in government defense, if I have that correct.
Yeah, so my division, we focus on SLTT, SLED, so state government, local government, K through 12 and higher ed. For us, we just see that as a area that has a lot of need. There's typically low budgets and not necessarily a lot of expertise, but it's an area that we all have vested interest in because we're all citizens of the states that we're in and they have our data. So we're focused on providing them affordable solutions to give them the security and networking capabilities that they need to do what they need to do as a agency, and also protect us in the process.
Very cool. Very cool. Well, okay. And back to you though. What's the last YouTube video you watched and that you're willing to cop to?
I'm absolutely, utterly ashamed. But the last YouTube video that I watched was the Nickelback singing Rockstar as a sea shanty.
That has exceeded my expectations. Oh wow, I'm gonna take it a second to recover from that. But I'm really disappointed that neither of you said the January 2023 webinar on reframing vulnerability management. I'm highly disappointed. With that said, I do want to open up to our first polling question, and this is a chance to get some feedback from the audience about kind of this business context topic and what it means to you as security professionals and practitioners. And so, the question, I think everyone should see it at this point, about how happy you are with the responsiveness of business leaders to your cyber risk reporting. Very neutral, not at all. And while that's happening, just to kick off this discussion, I actually wanted to share a little bit of an anecdote. So, like I mentioned before, I worked in a media and entertainment company, and in that kind of role, business context is king, right? There's thousands of servers, thousands of workstations, tens of thousands of employees, you name it, that there was technology for it. So that said, in the spirit of the time, the year that we're in, and this particular topic, I actually wanted to tip this off with a little bit of an extra story. For those of you who don't live in America or aren't big sports fans, every March there's a college basketball tournament called March Madness. Billions of dollars are wagered on it. Millions of people watch it. And for those of you who don't live in America, think of it kind of as a World Cup for basketball in a small micro sense. But it is a really big deal for sports fans here. And not to mention my previous company, because we were actually responsible for streaming of the games. So now I believe everyone in our industry remembers Log4j and Shell Shock and other nasty vulnerabilities that result in remote code execution. Well, this story actually involves a struts vulnerability from a few years ago. The exploit code was trivial, akin to Log4j, and was actually the vulnerability that began the Equifax breach, for those of you who are aware of it. Now, the news for this vulnerability broke a week before March Madness was set to tip off, and we went into overdrive to figure out if March Madness itself was vulnerable. And thankfully, we're actually covered. So that's awesome. But turns out there was some shared infrastructure that was actually vulnerable. So to cut a long story short, a compromised host in that shared infrastructure started consuming all sorts of bandwidth 2 hours before games were set to begin. And that made the origin servers for the March Madness application unreachable, and it pretty much left us in a panic. And, we were within a knife's edge, basically, of not being able to stream games, the origin servers being unreachable during the time, like the most critical time for our company. And just, just to further the point here, March Madness is obviously a significant revenue driver for the company as well. So, the reason for telling you this story is that we knew about the vulnerabilities in the shared infrastructure, and it was communicated, and even better, we actually had a plan to address them. What we failed to understand was that the business context and impact would what the business context and impact would be to March Madness itself. That context may have been key to gether patches applied or more immediately, or kind of putting mitigating controls in place. So hence the reason why we think business context is so important to kind of the foundation of a good security posture, generally speaking, but of course, ultimately as it relates to vulnerability management. So, so with that said, maybe we can go ahead and close the poll and get our first results. Very cool, very cool. So I guess most people are pretty neutral on the topic of responsiveness of business leaders to our reporting. Require some rounds of discussion, but eventually they get their teams to act. I think that's pretty much how I feel about most of my my experiences as well. But it's very cool to see that 21% of you feel like the leaders are acting very quickly on risks that we deem high priority when we provide proper context and build good trust. That's a pretty heartening thing to consider. So with that said, I guess I wanted to get kind of into the meat of our conversation today and really talk about, risk-based vulnerability management, like I guess business context, generally speaking, how it enables processes for us, and then ultimately why it's so important, how do we gather it, and then, some strategies that we can put to work once we have it, so to speak. So I want to kick it over to Kayla for a second. And Kayla, so tell me why you think business context is important to kind of a security posture, your perspective as a CISO for, a medium-sized enterprise.
It is crucial for security teams to understand the business context. And when I say context, I mean goals and objectives, the mission, the vision, where we are today, where we're going to be tomorrow, where we were yesterday, so that you can build your strategy to pivot as things start to change. Understanding where your threat landscape is or isn't is absolutely, crucial to being able to deliver on a strategy that gives you the bang for the buck, right? The return on investment. I think we're moving past, at least I feel that we as an industry are moving past security is just a cost center. They don't deliver any value. They just spend money on these ridiculously expensive vendors, right? Now every company is a security company, whether that is, what they market themselves as or not, because everyone has data. The data explosion. We've gone from, just having, gigabytes to having petabytes of data just floating around, as you say, right? And you have to know where your potential vulnerabilities are on your critical assets, your business critical processes, systems, applications, whatever synonym you want to throw in there. That way you can protect the crown jewels. You can respond appropriately. You're going to respond very differently to an incident due to a vulnerability or not. If it's impacting, your business critical data, systems, applications, than you are to, say, a public facing website or application that has only public data in it. Those are two very different things. And knowing where to throw your resources, especially in today where we're seeing budgets, security budgets and teams be just decimated. You want to use your resources wisely, and your company wants you to do that as well.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Josh, do you have any feedback to like of your own, or to kind of support what Kayla was saying there?
Yeah, absolutely. So one of the biggest things to kind of take from this is that you have to know what your agency or organization has, and then what's really important to you. What is causing you to have your money generating activities and tie everything back to those money generating activities. Just because something seems kind of insignificant doesn't mean that it truly is. You know, might have a Slack channel that, oh, that's just something that we have, you know, chats back and forth. But no, you might actually have legitimate important data that's in there that's now in a third-party service that you need to understand what their risk profile is and make sure that you understand what that shared responsibility is. What data am I putting in these third-party applications? Are they protecting to the same standard that I want them to protect it to? And if not, maybe I should look at a different third party.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And then I contrast that against, you know, another application that might have, or a development server or something like that, that has like a critical vulnerability. And then you kind of think, is it really that critical? Is it like if it's on a dev server, is it and doesn't have any data attached to it? It's, you know, development data, et cetera, et cetera. So, you know, that third-party Slack channel that has, like, you know, people sharing access keys in it, it's probably a far more critical asset in the context of your business than some dev server with a, you know, a critical remote code execution vulnerability. So I completely resonate and hear you on those topics. Now, like, you know, and just to kind of further that, like, we think about things like on top of the control, like on top of, you know, what is actually happening within those systems. We also think about mitigating controls that might be in place, whether or not there's firewalls, network segmentation, endpoint detection and response, et cetera, et cetera. So I think, you know, I think all these things are really, really important to contemplate when we're thinking about a security posture, generally speaking, but also, of course, you know, as it relates to vulnerability management. So, you know, what I'm interested though, Josh, so like, can you maybe give us some perspective on how you think that business context can kind of help our reporting and our metrics that we're delivering for, you know, the board of directors, our CISOs, you know, our stakeholders, our partners. And yeah, I'm interested to get your thoughts there.
Sure. The biggest thing for me is when I look at security metrics, I have to answer the question of, why does this matter to somebody who is not IT or security?
Absolutely.
So I'll use a common example across the board as, you know, an IT person, you know, I ran server teams, and things like 4 nines versus 5 nines is super important. You know, uptime's critical. To a business person on the operations side, that means nothing. But when I tell them that the difference between 4 nines and 5 nines is $30,000 in income per day, magically the light comes on and they get it. They go, okay, now the money that we're spending to do this is giving me a return on investment. And finding how to kind of tie back those metrics to return on investment, whether it's reduced cyber insurance, or now you're able to pursue other kind of areas of contracting, like you want to go after Fed contracts or state government contracts, and now you've gone through and done security attestations, whether it's a SOC 2 type 2, or you're going for some version of RAMP, or your ISO 27001. Yes, those have upfront costs, but you're able to recoup those costs on the back end because now you're more marketable. And you've changed that security just from being a cost center to now being a profit center.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Could not agree with you more. Kayla, I'm really interested in your perspective on this as a kind of sitting in the CISO seat for Devo.
Yeah, what we do is we tie to reputation, brand as well. I think that's a huge one that's often overlooked, is your reputational risk. What's at stake? And being able to tie your risk, you know, everyone knows like the 5x5, the matrix and the impact table. Adding your own like I don't want to get a swim lane, but your own like line to that to say reputation risk. Is it tied to your product, like dollars lost there? Is it tied to maybe one of your biggest customers? And if you have an incident that involves them. So understanding what's at stake and having eyes on things like that and how to, like, as I mentioned before, pivot and respond appropriately is really important.
Very cool. Very cool. Well, I mean, so with respect to that, then, like, I guess now we should probably talk about how do we gather it, right? Like what do we do to get this really important business context that is so foundational to how a kind of a modern vulnerability management program, a responsive vulnerability management program, responsive security posture needs to be in, you know, 2023 and beyond. So Caleb, I understand that you actually have, a questionnaire that you developed, and I believe we're going to share it today for the context for for our audience today. So Lauren, if you don't mind kind of pulling it up and having Caleb walk through it, I would really appreciate that.
Yeah, absolutely. Happy to walk everyone through this. It is appropriately named a BCQ for Business Criticality Questionnaire. The way this is laid out is, I'll define criticality for everyone here. It is understanding what or who has access to, processes, stores, or transmits your data, and or has access into your system. So like as Josh mentioned, third parties, maybe fourth parties via some sort of proxy, you don't know, especially like Slack, API connections, things like that. Those things should be taken into consideration here too. So what I like to do is get to the application attributes. So for those of you that have like a GRC tool in your company, whether it's something like Lynx or ServiceNow, Archer, like you should have an application record or a system record. So I like to ask very simple questions. Is it hosted at your office? Is the application hosted in a data center that's, own financial services? They have their own mainframe systems and data centers in-house. So trying to get to the root of that. Is it a colo? Is it cloud? Is it developed by you? Is it developed by a third party? If it's a third party, has it gone through your vendor security risk assurance process? Have you actually looked at that vendor? Trying to get to like the real root of what this is and by this application or system. And then, how many customers interact with it? If they do, how many internal employees, that kind of gives you what your attack surface could potentially be. And then the real crux of this questionnaire comes down to information classification. Does the application process or transmit any of the types of data? So if you have an acceptable use policy or an information classification and handling guideline in your organization, this piece here would be customized to whatever your standards are. So does it have access to PII, PFI? Is it publicly accessible information? Is it customer information, intellectual property, unpublished company corporate information? So this, you can't see it here, but there actually is a drop down in there, yes, no, not applicable, that would then give you, based on your own classification scheme, what kind of data this is. So let's say you have a system that has none of the above except for unpublished company corporate information. So that's like unpublished audit reports, financial statements, meetings from your board of directors meetings, things like that. Nothing else in there except for that information. That would be considered a critical asset. Critical information is housed within this system, right? That's not something you'd want to get out, right? It could potentially impact your market share, as an example.
Yep, absolutely. Now, let me ask you this though.
Yeah.
How often are you guys completing these questionnaires, and do you find it's just a kind of a set it and forget it thing, or do you think it's something you need to continuously revisit?
This is a living process, right? I'd say living isn't, it's repeatable. What we did was a first tranche, trying to get as much done as we possibly could. And then it was updated on an annual basis for critical applications because they change. That application might not be critical a year from now because you've gone to another vendor, but let's keep the lights on type of scenario. So this is something you're going to want to look at repeatedly.
I think that's a really, really, really critical point, right? Like applications change, cloud accounts change, infrastructure changes, et cetera, et cetera. So like, given that we live in 2023 and we know all these things are dynamic, I think it's important to acknowledge that what an application or what a system or what a server was doing today may not be the case 6 months from now or a year from now, et cetera, et cetera. So, staying on top of these kind of functionalities and these business functions and what these applications were doing, I think is really, really, really important.
Absolutely.
Yep. Good stuff.
And it's important to know that this should not be answered just by the security team or your risk management function. This should be the person who is owning that application, that application asset owner, application owner, information owner, whichever way your company defines it. They should be the ones saying, this is my application, this is what's in it. and they will need to be walked through how to do something like this before, right? This is all new lingo. It's a new process, but it really helps them to take ownership over the whole, soup to nuts of this application. So the next section here that we have is, the RTO and RPO. And this is always interesting, getting the perspective from the business, because one, they usually don't know what this means, but two, they're like, this has to be up like 2 minutes and it's chaos. And it's like, is it really though? And then that spurns further discussions and opportunities for collaboration and education.
Yeah.
But then
I think really, sorry to interrupt. I think one thing in my experience that I've kind of encountered was that when you ask a particular person whose livelihood is associated with this application and the development and everything else, what the criticality is, they're going to say, of course, this is mission critical. This is the #1 priority for the company. But, and I think it's incumbent upon us as the practitioners and the engineers and everything else to kind of take a step back and kind of look at these things in the macro. Not to say that it's not important. Obviously, if it wasn't important, the company wouldn't be investing in it. But of course, there's always going to be things that are more critical than the others.
Yeah, absolutely. 100%. And, this is a conversation I've had throughout my time as like a second line of defense worker. It's like, oh, you need to tell me. Like, I can't tell you if this system goes down tomorrow and from a business continuity perspective, and we can't deliver on something, we can't, give our product, that has to come from you. I don't know. I don't work and breathe this every day. So it really needs to come from the business side. And then that would help to shape the strategy going forward.
Absolutely.
And that's kind of where this criticality assessment piece comes in. The business needs to understand from a confidentiality and integrity perspective, the financial loss, what's that impact? And this should all tie to your 5x5 matrix. What's the impact? What's the likelihood? Worst case scenario, if you have a system that has your corporate unpublished financial information and you are a Fortune 50 company, Fortune 100, 500, and that unpublished information got leaked, got hacked because there was a vulnerability and someone got in, what's the worst case scenario?
Absolutely.
And it sounds doom and gloom. It does, but it helps you prepare and be proactive for your defenses so that you can prevent something like that happening. So what I like to do is, from a business impact assessment perspective as well, is to go through and say, okay, if you don't have your availability of this data, the system isn't available for 1-3 hours. Is that insignificant or is it catastrophic? All the way up, if you move to the right, you'll be able to see it kind of goes out to like a week and in different ways, because the way you respond within the first 3 hours is going to be different if you're down for a week.
Absolutely. Very cool.
And
Very cool.
yeah, I think, and this right here is the manual side. You can absolutely automate something like this through a system. And I highly encourage that you do, because
yeah. I think any company that's operating at a scale of more than, a singular person is probably on how to automate some of this, but we certainly understand that this is kind of provided as an example for sure.
Yeah.
Sorry, go ahead.
No, I was going to say, and then you just take the maximum rating, whether it's insignificant across the board, or if it's, confidentiality is significant, integrity is insignificant, and then availability is catastrophic. You're going to take the highest rating, and that's going to give you your scale. If something's baseline, it's probably got public data, public facing, not a big deal. If it's important, maybe it's something that, if there was an incident or you had a DR scenario, you wouldn't need to respond within the first 8 hours. But those critical ones are something that you want to have your eyes and ears on, and that will help to frame the rest of your cybersecurity strategy. And in the context of this discussion here, what you would do from a vulnerability management perspective to protect that asset and prioritize it above the others.
Yeah, absolutely. Now just kind of, Josh, I wanted to transition over to you for a second. Do you have any thoughts about how you would kind of assemble and gather this information from a business criticality point of view and kind of a business context point of view?
Yeah, so using the stuff that Kayla just provided is absolutely important, because that helps you puzzle everything else together. We switch to the matrix. So those that are familiar with the Eisenhower decision matrix, I've kind of done a spin off of that for cybersecurity vulnerability management. And what you're doing is you're really taking 4 individual Eisenhower or matrices and then combining them across the board. So that first one is business. What's the business impact? So this is that stuff that you're going to get from that BCP that Kayla just presented. It's going to say, is it important and urgent? Is it not important, not urgent? And then that kind of gives you some guidance on, well, if it's important and urgent, I need to do that now. But if it's not important and not urgent, maybe I should just automate that and have that done, automatically through a system already. Conversely, we take that into consideration with compliance, because just because it's not necessarily important from a business aspect, it might be important from the business aspect in that I'm required to comply with that. So we factor that in the matrix of, how important is that? Is this something that's going to stop me from doing business in a country, stop being able to do business with a vendor? Then we can kind of take a look at the technical piece. Is it a super hard critical vulnerability? Are we looking at a really high CVSS score? And is that CVS score, contextualized to my environment and still high? Or is it something that's a super low hanging fruit type of item that I probably can just automate at some point later? Then also to factor in difficulty. How hard is it to do these things? It's super easy to, for Windows to push out through SCCM or Big Fix or Tanium a patch. Now, if I have a super massive network and I have, thousands of devices and they're all, LTE routers that require you to physically go touch something, that's not easy. That's exceptionally hard. And the more devices you have, the harder it gets. So that kind of factors in as well. Is it hard, but not urgent? Okay, I'm going to have to schedule that and figure out how I'm going to do that. If it's hard and urgent, then I'm probably going to need to figure out how to do that right now. If it's easy, do easy mode. And then what you do is you take the individual ratings from all of these and put these into the larger matrix. And this kind of gives you that overall rating where you figure out, is it a critical? Is it a high? Is it a medium? Is it a low? For each one of these 4 categories, and then figure out, if it's across all 4 listed as critical, so it's hard and difficult, it's super important and urgent from both a technical and compliance standpoint, and then also for business, that's obviously critical. I'm going to do that right now. That's going to stop me from making money. Now, if it's, super critical for business and it's super critical for compliance, but it's fairly low from a technical standpoint, and it's a medium or high level difficulty, that's going to be kind of a high. It's going to be a hybrid between those things. Just because it's a critical for business does not necessarily mean it's a critical across the board when I'm looking at the larger vulnerability, because you have to kind of wait this out. Same thing applies. So I kind of built this matrix where, if you have any 2 or more do it nows, that's going to be a high. If it's across the board, critical, it's going to be critical. If you have any combination of that, that's going to be kind of that medium vulnerability level that you want to address sooner rather than later. And if it's, that low automated level, automate it, take care of it when it's done. One of the important things is to understand is that just because a vulnerability is a low level does not mean it's not important.
Absolutely.
Because when you look at how some of these new attacks are coming, they're chaining multiple low-level vulnerabilities because we don't necessarily patch them as quick as we do ones with a high or critical CVSS score. They're low-hanging fruit that we'll get to it when we get to it, which is why it's important to automate things as much as we can, even if it's something that's easy.
Yeah.
So taking all this stuff in, you kind of get a bigger, broader picture. And this kind of presents it in a way that's very visual and something that a business person can understand. And that's what's critical, is that I have to get buy-in from my business partners for them to understand why this is critical.
Absolutely. And one thing, it's funny, both of you mentioned kind of automation with respect to this, particular context, right? So I'm, just to a little bit of background, right? In my time at Warner Media, I actually was using Brinca to actually leverage the collection of this data to kind of inform our vulnerability opinions, et cetera, et cetera. So, I just as I think automation is really, 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 really important to kind of how all of this functionally operates. Cool. Well, so, I think to kind of move the discussion along a little bit, first and foremost, before I forget, if anybody has any questions, I really appreciate them kind of popping up in the chat. So, I didn't make that offer out there before, but if we really are open to anything that's relevant to both business context as well as vulnerability management, et cetera, et cetera. So please do make sure that we're leveraging the kind of the Q&A function and or the webinar chat. So anyway, and if we could now maybe move on to our next polling question, and so I wonder if you could pull that up for us, please. Now, what about the how we're tracking business context of assets and vulnerabilities to the automation point that we were all talking about before? Is it manually in-house or vendor, or we're not actually doing any tracking at all? And by the way, no shame if you're in the bottom bucket. We all started somewhere. So I'm certainly no.
Yeah, I think, to that point, it's important to understand the business context, but you won't know it if you don't have the eyes and ears of your executive team.
Absolutely.
And that buy-in is super critical too, right? You need, and it might not be them, it might be just that team delegating that out to somebody else who's a bit more closely aligned to what's happening boots on ground. But if you don't have those connections to win those hearts and minds, you won't necessarily understand the business context. So it really is like a two-way street. You have to be able to have those open and honest conversations with the leaders or their delegates to really make this work across the board, or you get like siloed criticality, if you will.
And to Kayla's point, when you do business context to your vulnerability management program, it's much easier to get buy-in from the folks that have to pony up money to do this.
That's a really important point. Yeah.
Ultimately, it's all money, whether it's technology, people, or process. They all cost dollars and cents. And when I tie vulnerabilities back to business justifications, business value, business context, that's when you get the light bulb come on and they go, I understand why this is important. I don't have to understand the bits and bytes. I understand that if I don't do this, this is going to impact these business critical processes. And that's where you get the most bang for your buck.
Yeah, absolutely. Do you want to go ahead and close the poll? See where the results are? Well, wow. Okay, so about 45% are using a vendor tool, and about 10% are using an in-house built tool. That's actually great to see. I would say if we asked this question a few years ago, it would not be that high. And 25% are doing it manually. That's fantastic. And 20% are not currently tracking it, which again, I have been there, so I know that pain all too well. But yeah, so all that said, one other thing that, I was thinking about in terms of kind of business context and why it's important is, in my previous role, also like media entertainment company, we're the parent company for CNN as well. And, you think about threats and risks to a news brand completely different way than you would to, a logging aggregation platform, AT&T, et cetera, et cetera. People's lives are at stake here. Like there were secure communications, there were endpoints that need to be protected, there were sources out there, et cetera, et cetera. So, like that could be another aspect to this, right? Like kind of like physical safety, personal communications, et cetera, that you kind of contemplate when you're thinking about business context in the aggregate here. And that was something that really stuck with me in my time at Warner Media. So I just figured that was also kind of relevant to bring up. But yeah, so I think we have a few questions here in the from the audience, and I guess we'll just take it from the top. And, so having a threat intelligence feed, usually more than one, also plays a role while providing the complete view of vulnerability criticality. Given not all alerts are big, how can you make this a reality? That's a fantastic question. Kayla, I'd be interested to hear your thoughts on this.
Yeah, it's vulnerability criticality is based on how you're using your application or your system and like what information is in there. So I think, Josh, I believe you had said it before, just because you have a score of critical does not mean that's coming in from your feeds does not mean that it's critical in the context of your business. So having the ability to have someone who's utilizing this vulnerable tool system, et cetera, to come in and to tell you, oh no, this isn't critical because, we aren't using it this way, or we have these mitigating controls. They're not going to say controls, but we were doing this to protect us, right? They're not going to use the risk word. So I apologize for that. Like, that's just my nomenclature by default. But having a small team, or a small company, you can still be protecting your assets. It's all about the communication. And I don't know if you're using a ticketing system like a Jira, or if you're just using, even a Kanban board to track certain things, whatever your mechanism you're using, open that up to other people and tag them in it and say, hey, I think this is owned by your department, or I know it is. Are we susceptible to this? Is it this critical? And getting that context, because once you have the context, if something else comes in, you'll know how to respond, and you'll start to build your own internal knowledge, and you won't need to be dependent on those other teams. Because I have multiple threat intel feeds as well, and it can be very overwhelming.
Yeah. So, all that, going back to kind of that threat intelligence piece of it though, right? I totally understand what you're saying, the person, what they're doing, the nature of the application, et cetera. But thinking about how threat intelligence fits into this puzzle, right? Do you do anything to operationalize it on a regular basis to kind of to infuse it, again, to the questioner, to the person asking the question's point, not all orgs are big. How do you leverage threat intelligence to kind of impact or tweak vulnerability criticality in what you do on a daily basis?
So let me take that.
I go for it, Josh. Yeah.
So, threat intelligence is near and dear to my heart. Yes, there are a lot of really great platforms out there that provide threat intelligence, Recorded Future, Mandiant, Palo Alto Unit 42, all have amazing stuff. The reality is they're super expensive too. But there are also really awesome information sharing organizations, whether you're part of an ISAC. So I work largely state government. I'm a member of the multi-state ISAC that provides threat intelligence based focused around my industry that I'm dealing with. They have it for fintech, they have it for agriculture, they have it for a whole plethora of different organizations. So finding those ISACs or ISOs that relate to your field is a great way to get really good tailored threat intelligence to your industry without having to, pay, thousands or hundreds of thousands of dollars to a threat intelligence company.
Sure.
But and then you have.
So one thing I'm not going to let you off the hook for though, Josh. Okay, so we have a feed, right? How do we leverage that feed to really impact criticality? Because I'll tell you this, in my previous experience, this is something we struggle with, right? Like this is something we struggle with heavily. And until we had a platform to like Brinka to leverage, to automate some of that, it was really hard. And so I'm curious as to like how you kind of take those feeds and make them a reality to actually leveraging it on a daily basis. And we might not have the right answer, by the way. So I'm curious.
Yeah, and it's actually a great segue. There are other organizations like InfoGuard that provide some great threat intelligence. And then to your point, you have to operationalize that. So part of that is finding what is actually applicable to your organization, which means I have to know what's in my organization, what software, hardware, what data I have, what's applicable, and then really put a lot of focus in on what do I do with this data once I have it?
Yeah.
And I'm putting it into a SIM tool or my IDS, IPS, my EDR, and building alerts based off of that so that I'm triggering off the right things that are targeting my industry. Because if I get the information and go, this is good stuff, and don't do anything with it,
Right. Exactly.
I'm not getting
Yeah.
any value.
Exactly.
Value is
Exactly.
taking that,
Absolutely.
doing some kind of detection, or going, all right, I'm in fintech, and there's this new ransomware that is targeting fintech, but I'm not using the tool stack that's targeting. Well, maybe I go, well, it's not targeting my tool stack, but I have a similar product that has a similar vulnerability. Maybe I take that and use that as information to go, I really need to look at how I can put additional layers of security around that, because obviously that's a high interest thing for,
Sure.
Hacker group, whatever bear or whatever panda is targeting that,
Yeah,
that
and
particular industry.
absolutely.
Kelly,
I was
go
just going to say, I think that, that ties back to what I was saying before, Josh. I think you just put it a little bit more eloquently. It's like knowing, what's in your environment and who owns it, and being able to build that. I don't want to call it a risk register, but building that understanding of what controls are in place around these tools is going to in applications, it's going to help you to understand that business context. And as you just quite rightly pointed out, like maybe you don't have something that's getting impacted by a vulnerability like to a T, but you're kind of looking across and you're going, wait a second, I have something very similar. And that is an emerging risk. That could be a new threat, a new attack vector that's going to be coming down the pike, being able to kind of see, okay, let me take lessons learned here and apply it to this thing that's kind of off to the side. It's not under attack yet, but it's susceptible because it has the same kind of information or the same type of underlying technology stack, and being prepared and putting those mitigating controls in advance. I think that's a great point that you've just raised. It's kind of emerging risks. It's kind of like seeing into the future, and I know it can seem like it's really difficult to do, but just having that awareness, I think, is key.
For sure. And so, to the person asking the question's point, this is hard, right? This is really, really hard. And so my advice to those sorts of people would be start with what you can, right? And so with that, maybe it's actually the perfect segue into our next polling question, actually, right? So if we could pull up the last polling question for us, Lauren. So what's the biggest challenge, right? What does the audience feel is the biggest challenge? And then while that's happening, we get a chance to kind of respond there. I think we'll go into the next question here. So can you share an example of a situation where the prioritization process did not go as planned and what you learned from that experience? Josh, I'll kick that to you. What do you think about this one?
So I can think of a couple times where that occurred, and that the organization didn't really have a good understanding of what their applications were doing. So they didn't understand what the real business impact of these systems were. And largely it was OT type devices where they went, oh, it's just OT. We don't worry about that.
Yeah.
And then they found out that they really care about their OT because that's what's generating their business. That's the thing that's controlling their machinery. That's the thing that's controlling their production. And understanding that when that was hit, that shut them down. They were dead in the water. Yeah. It didn't matter how tightly controlled their traditional IT was, because they didn't fully understand all the OT stuff.
Right. That
created a problem.
And for those of us that might not be in the US, do you want to maybe explain a little bit about what OT means? I think that might be a very US centric construct.
Yeah, easy enough. So everyone kind of has a good idea of what IT is. It's all your email, it's your routing and switching, it's all the business type stuff that you do. OT, or operational technology, is those technologies that they're bits and bytes, they're things that go beep and boop, but they're not what we would consider traditional IT. So they're PLCs that help run your machinery, they're sensors, they're the security cameras in your environment, they're all the IoT things that you might have in your environment. They're the things that make other things work. A great example is, particularly in medical environments, is X-ray machines.
Yep.
MRIs. You go sit behind those, and a lot of those are still running Windows XP Service Pack 2 with no updates on it, and they're connected to a network. But they have to be connected to the network because you need to get the X-rays off that system for a radiologist on the other side of the country to read and do their job and send that back. So you have to understand, I have vulnerabilities here. It's on my OT network. It's not on my IT network, because on IT side, I would have patched that a long time ago and it wouldn't be running Windows XP. But because it's a medical device, I can't do those things. So now I have to make sure that I'm putting the appropriate layers of defense around it and do as much mitigation as I can so that I'm protecting patient data, because obviously we're dealing with HIPAA stuff, but I'm also protecting my IT assets from my OT and my OT from my IT.
Yep, for sure. Kayla, do you have any quick thoughts on this subject?
I can just think of, a couple. I'll try to keep it short. Yeah, but I think one of the biggest example I can give, it was Log4j.
Yeah.
It was, there was vulnerabilities that people knew about happening in Java. There was outdated, was it version 1? I think, there was a lot of issues there. Yeah. And
all the versions of Java are always out of date.
but then, Log4j hit and they were like, oh, we don't know if it impacts version 1 because it's deprecated. We don't look at it. It's keep the lights on. So if you've got it, you may or may not be impacted. Good luck. Right. That was kind of how it was. And, we didn't prioritize. Right. We were like, it's there. And then it's like, oh my God, they're saying it's there. They don't know. They're not going to test it. It's kind of up to us. And then it was one of those situations where we had to pivot to respond.
For sure.
And that was like a risk that was on the radar, but it wasn't prioritized until that fateful December 10th. That is in my head, is when that Log4j hit. And it was a weekend that turned into a very long business week of trying to uncover, because our asset inventory wasn't up to our expectations at the time. Yeah. So it was that search, too bad you can't just Control F and just search your whole network, right?
Very long holiday, very long week, followed by a very long holiday season, followed by a very long month. Yeah.
And now we're over a year later, and there are still Log4j vulnerabilities out in the wild that haven't been mitigated.
Good stuff.
Absolutely.
Good stuff. Well, I want to maybe leave it for one last question here. And let's see, it's what is, in your opinion, the best way how to deal with risks that are connected with several company solutions applications, like vulnerable technology, used within several solutions with different owners? Therefore, at first sight, there is no clear risk owner. And I think if I'm kind of parsing this question correctly, it's at the end of the day, he's saying there's just multiple cooks in the kitchen for one particular vulnerable asset. And again, my experience definitely have a lot of those situations. Josh, what about you? What do you think? Do you have any kind of ways you could think about how to best deal with the risks that are kind of go across the gamut?
So one of the things that I've always recommended is, when you have an application or a service, you build a RACI chart for that application. You, in writing, assign somebody as responsible, who's accountable for it, who's coordinated with, and who's informed. Once you have that built, that answers this question. There is somebody who is absolutely by name in charge of that application. And that should be documented in whatever your GRC tools are.
Yeah.
Whether it's Archer, and if you don't have it, well, that's a great time to build one.
I guess I'll be the voice of reason in the room. Some of us weren't so privileged to have one owner that actually owned everything within a particular server or host or asset. And I will just say, the concept of having at least multiple was better than having none. So if you had 3 or 4 different people that were kind of like vested in stakeholders in a particular machine or a host, you were in a better situation than I found myself in multiple times over, which was, I don't know what that thing does. I know it's blinking. I know it has an IP address, but I know it has my name on it, but I don't know. I'm disavowing all knowledge of it.
Yeah, I think, what I do, because I find myself in this situation at every job I've had, even as an internal auditor right out of college, I assign a risk item to every single one of them.
Wow.
And I say, I want a response. And then they say, oh, I don't own this. I don't have to. Okay, so if so-and-so makes this decision, are you okay with that? And if they say yes, awesome. If they say no, I say, okay, you know what? Let's get everybody on a call. Let's talk about this, because the decisions that are being made are going to impact this application, whatever. And that has ramifications. And then letting them decide who is going to actually ultimately be responsible. Does it take a little bit longer? Sure. Is it political? Absolutely. But it will get you where you need to go. When I worked for financial services, it was much easier because they understand risk management. They have to, right? But working in a SaaS company, I can't tell you how many times they've done this. What do you mean? It's that person. It's that person. It's not me. Yeah. And getting everyone on a call and saying, okay, well then if this person makes this decision, this is what their decision is going to be. Cool, not cool, figure it out. And then just keeping tabs on it is very important. If you don't get a response and by your deadline, a couple days before, reminding people on the due date, remind people the day after, the week after, whatever it might be, then bringing it, if you have a governance forum, bringing it to the governance forum, bringing it to the executive team, whatever your structure is, and saying, look, these are risks. They've been identified. They're not being responded to. And that response could be, I just accept it. I'm going to mitigate it. I'm going to transfer it, et cetera, et cetera. But they have to do something. And yeah, sorry, Josh, go ahead. I know you're very opinionated on this one.
So,
Make it quick, Josh. Well,
that I am absolutely the guy who will pull the plug on it and see who screams.
Yeah, I've done it. You have to sometimes.
Like, if nobody will give me an answer, who owns this thing? And I'm getting it's their job. Pull the plug. Who screams? Whoever screams, you now own this. This is your baby because you're the one that screamed.
Oof, yeah, I'm glad. I'm glad I'm on this side of the table for you guys. I mean, but here's the thing. Like, and we could probably talk about this for days, right? I think a lot of security teams find themselves hamstrung by that concept, right? As much as it would probably be effective, it would also probably be a career limiting move for some of us if we turn things off without,
Oh yeah, always get air coverage.
Productive. Yeah. So
even as a CISO, I get air coverage. I'll tell the CEO, I'm going to do something. Do you agree or disagree? And typically it's like, yeah, you know what, you're right. They need their access cut. They need that system shut down until they decide to respond. Yep.
Yeah, and that's the thing. That's not your first course of action. You just don't go and start ripping the plugs out. That's. Please, who owns this? Like, I see that you're logged into this. Do you own this? Do you know who this might belong to? And when you don't make any traction, that's when you get that coverage from above and go, all right, we're at a crossroads. Let's go ahead and make it a, career event one way or the other. Somebody's going to either fess up to ownership or we're just going to leave it shut off. And that was maybe a system we didn't need in the first place.
Absolutely. Well, fair enough. Well, so guys, this was really fun and interesting and enlightening from my point of view. So I wanted to thank you both for coming and kind of sharing and expressing your thoughts. Do you have any last takeaways for the audience?
Yeah, I would say, no matter the size of your team, it's really important that you understand the business context. Set up those one-to-ones with the leaders at your company or their direct reports, if depending on how your company open door policy or not. Like, set them up, have the conversations, ask the questions that they may not have been asked before, and frame it as, this is how I'm going to protect the assets of the company and have and demonstrate the ability to show return on investment.
For sure. Josh, any closing thoughts?
Yeah, for me, the number one thing that is not a technical piece that will make you a better cybersecurity person is understanding business. and being able to talk business as it relates to cybersecurity. If you can develop that skill, you have unlimited potential in the field.
Absolutely. And the reason I'm laughing is I see Albion's comment here. Thanks for this professional therapy. I think all the practitioners
cathartic.
probably kind of resonate with the topics here. But yeah, on that note, thank you to all of the attendees who joined today. We really appreciate your time. We know this is probably a topic near and dear to many people. So we thank you for your time, and we hope to see you at the next one of these. Have a good one, everyone.